Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn. Today I have something a little different, a little special for you guys. Some of you might remember a couple weeks ago, I got a special care package sent to me by the developers of a game called Wonders of the First. And I promised in the unboxing video for that care package that I would play the hell out of the game and give you my honest thoughts on what I think about the game, give you an honest review, and that's what this video is. So, can it stand toe-to-toe with some of the heavyweights in the collectible card game market? I'm happy to report, yes. Before I get ahead of myself, what exactly is Wonders of the First? Wonders of the First is a brand new collectible card game, similar to Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, or Yu-Gi-Oh! And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to mostly be comparing the game to Magic the Gathering, as that's the game that's mostly covered on this channel. The game comes packaged in starter decks as well as randomized booster packs. You build your collection from a random assortment of cards, and then you're able to use that collection to customize your own 50 card decks. This is 10 cards less than a standard Magic the Gathering deck, but it's also worth noting that you are limited to the number of copies of particular cards that you can use. So you can have up to 3 copies of the same secondary wonder in your deck, but only 2 copies of any primary wonder, and just 1 copy of any legendary wonder. Think of wonders like creatures in Magic. So even though legendaries are going to be way more powerful, the secondary wonders that you can have playsets of are going to be the backbone of your deck construction. So it's really important to figure out your archetypes, figure out the core of your deck based on these secondary wonders, and then just use your legendary wonders as spice, as a way to turn the deck up to 11 and go really crazy if you happen to draw it. All of the cards that you're using to build your deck are divided up into 6 orbitals, and these orbitals are very similar to the 5 colors of Magic. They have different strengths and weaknesses, and support different deck building styles and play styles. Boundless represents knowledge and mystery. Heliosynth encompasses technology and techno-theology. Umbrathine represents secrecy and the interplay between darkness and light. Patria represents harmony, growth, and adaptation. Sulfera is all about war, wealth, and resilience. Thalwind is all about exploration, freedom, and elemental mastery. Now, what I appreciate most about the orbitals in Wonders of the First is just how much less constricting and less limiting they are than colors are in Magic. You're free to put as many orbitals as you want in a deck, and instead the game smartly incentivizes a less is more approach, where it nudges you in the direction of what you should want to do instead of telling you what you can't do. And all of this leads us to what is fundamentally probably the most important part of this game: resource management. And honestly, the way this game handles resource management is the thing about it that impressed me the most. Now, you have 2 different types of resources in this game. You have actions, which is something I'll talk about a little bit later, and then you have energy. And energy is your standard. You accumulate this resource in order to pay the cost of playing cards from your hand, and as the game goes on, you get more of it so that you can play more powerful cards. Now, typically, a game has 2 different ways of dealing with this type of a resource. You have the way Magic does it, which is you have to draw lands and play lands in order to fuel your spells from your hand. Now, the upside to this is that introduces variance, and it helps keep the game fresh and surprising. It's less predictable and less about lining things up in a certain pattern and trying to repeat that pattern every single game, because you have to adapt to having more or less resources available from game to game. Now, the other side of the spectrum is a game like Hearthstone, which gives you automatic energy every turn. So on the first turn you have 1, and then on the second you have 2, and on the third you have 3. And that's nice because you don't have to worry about having too much or not enough, but you do have to worry about there not being enough variance in the game because of that. So games like Hearthstone will introduce artificial variance by using a lot of RNG mechanics, cards that just randomly summon random things, that keep the game surprising in order to keep that variance in the game. What this game does very cleverly is it sort of rides the line between the two. So you do accumulate energy every single turn. On turn 1 you'll have 1, on turn 2 you'll have 2, all the way up to turn 7 giving you 7 energy. But you also, in addition to that, have lands that you can draw into, which will reduce the cost of your spells by 1 if they are a spell that is of the same orbital as that land. And then you also have ways to accumulate extra energy on turns by stealing gems from the realms that you're fighting for. And if you have more, you can generate more extra energy. In this way, you kind of get the best of both worlds, where you're able to mitigate a lot of the problems with mana flood or mana screw from games like Magic the Gathering, but still introduce enough variance to keep the game surprising and fresh. Once you have a land of a particular orbital in play, it's going to reduce the cost of all cards being played from your hand that are of that same orbital by 1 energy. This is called a link. For example, we see Sulfera Link here. It's also really important to remember that orbital links do not stack. So even though you can get an orbital link of each orbital, reducing the cost of cards from all of those orbitals by 1, you're not going to get additional cost reduction beyond that -1 if you have multiple lands in play of the same orbital. Each turn you get 3 actions, and you have to spend an action to play a card or to attack the opponent. In addition to energy cost reduction, lands also have the ability to become harvested to gain an action. When you harvest the land, you tap it, and you can only do this once per game. The land never untaps. But because of this, you'll never get flooded, because if you draw a land, you can just play it and then harvest it to get your action back. Now, before I continue to go down a rabbit hole with this resource management side of the game, it is important that I let you guys know just how combat works, how gameplay in general works, and how you win the game. In a similar fashion to Marvel Snap, you have multiple realms that you're initiating combat in. Whereas Snap only has 3, this game has 7. And just like Marvel Snap, each realm opens up one at a time as rounds progress. So by round 7, all 7 realms will be unlocked. Each realm is in possession of 1 stone, and the goal is to claim victory by gaining control of more stones than your opponent by the end of round 7. On any given turn, you can play cards to or initiate combat in any unlocked realm. So as the game progresses, you have more and more options open to you as far as where you play your cards and where you initiate combat. When choosing to initiate combat in a given realm, you compare the total power of all wonders you control in that realm against the total power of all wonders your opponent controls in the same realm. Whoever has the higher number wins the combat and claims the stone. But stones are way more important than just being a victory condition, because just like I hinted at earlier in this video, for each stone that you control at the beginning of a round, you're going to gain 1 extra energy that you can use to play the cards from your hand. In addition to lands granting orbital links and giving you the opportunity to harvest to get actions, they also fulfill core requirements. Some of the more powerful cards in the game have a core requirement for the orbital that they're associated with, which means you have to have at least 1 land of that orbital in play before you can play that card. Now, with all of the fundamentals out of the way, let's get right down to it. What do I love about this game? What are my concerns? And do I think you should give this game a try? The answer to that last question is a resounding yes. If you're anything like me, you've been exhausted over the last couple of years with Magic the Gathering's power creep, with product fatigue, and with the shuffler on MTG Arena just constantly feeling like it's out to get you. And the one thing that I noticed about this game is not only did I enjoy this as a breath of fresh air, as a very different change of pace to what Magic is, but I actually found myself enjoying Magic more after I took a break from Magic to play this game and sort of change up my strategies and my thinking in a completely different way, and then coming back to Magic fresh. So circling back, let's talk about the things about this game I found myself really enjoying, and the first of which is definitely the resource management. And this game, the way it manages resources is definitely different than a game like Magic the Gathering. You have these 3 actions per round that you're allowed to employ, and that sort of changes up the value of certain things within the game. So, for example, I went into this game with a very Magic the Gathering mindset, where I thought to myself, whatever cards are going to make the most amount of energy or draw me the most amount of cards for the cheapest cost or the most consistently are going to be the most powerful cards to try to build around. But what I found was, because you have this action system in place where you have 3 actions per round, no matter how much mana you have, how much energy you have, or how many cards you draw, you're bottlenecked to only being able to perform 3 actions per round. So, whereas in a game like Magic the Gathering, the most powerful cards in the game, the Power 9, are all cards that are giving you free mana like Moxes or Black Lotus, or drawing you extra cards like Ancestral Recall or Time Twister, that's not necessarily the case here. Using something like that in Magic the Gathering is incredibly powerful. And the reason that's so powerful is because the more mana you have in Magic and the more cards you have in Magic, the more you can do in a single turn. But because you can only take 3 actions in this game per round, having a whole bunch of energy or a whole bunch of cards, while nice, is not the end all be all. In this game, actions are king. And there's so much nuance to ways in which you can generate extra actions or perform functions within the game that would normally cost you an action, but find ways to do it without it costing you an action, such as cards that give you free attacks. Another thing I absolutely love about this game is the way they handle their art and the way they template out their cards. I feel like most collectible card games that are new are kind of lost in a sea of clones. They all have way too much text, they all look the same, and it's really hard to distinguish game from game, let alone distinguish one card from another. Whereas this game's visuals are very distinct, you can tell from the other side of the room what cards someone is using, and I find all the art to be very striking. One of the things about this game that I absolutely love is the deck build score. Instead of having a banned list that gets updated regularly like most card games do, you have a point system where cards are allocated a certain number of points, and the more powerful a card is, the more points it gets. Different formats can use these points to determine the power level of decks, with high-powered formats letting you play decks that consist of a total power value that is very high. And then if cards become too problematic, instead of banning them, you can just increase the number of points that card takes up so that the rest of the deck's power level has to come down in order to make that deck viable. And in addition to this, they can also do really cool things with this deck score, like introduce other formats similar to Pauper. Whereas with Magic the Gathering, a Pauper format allows you to only use commons. You could do something similar here, except just have a small point value where you're not necessarily limited to only commons, but you have to mainly use the lower rarity cards in order to meet the point requirements. So it's kind of like Pauper, except a little bit less restrictive and more interesting, because you could put some rares in there as long as the rest of the deck is very underpowered in order to meet those point restrictions. Now let's take a moment to talk about some of my concerns with the game, because my first concern initially was this point value system, because if you're a casual player, it might not be easy to keep up to date with how many points each card is and how many points you're allowed to run in your deck and that sort of thing. But then I thought about it and I realized that if you're a casual player, you're not really worried about that stuff, right? You're playing casually. It doesn't matter if someone's playing a deck that's way more powerful than you, or if a card is, nerfed into non-existence, because you're a casual player. You're just playing with your friends for fun. So I realized that concern is actually not really a concern, but I wanted to still bring it up and let you guys see where my thought process was on this. One concern that I do actually have, however, is how aggro works within the game, because right now, since the game lasts 7 rounds no matter what, it gives control and combo decks the viability to just sort of wait it out and still do ridiculous, crazy end game scenarios on turn 7 that can just take all of the stones and win the game. With aggro decks, typically in a game like Magic the Gathering, you can end the game quick before the other deck is allowed to do their big, crazy, splashy stuff that they're trying to stay alive long enough to do. But in this game, there's no ending the game early, so I am a little bit concerned about that. Granted, the fact that you get extra energy when you steal gems by winning combats does help aggro get an edge, and it does make aggro viable, but at the end of the day, I'm not 100% sure if that's enough to really make aggro worth playing against these crazy controller combo decks that are now less constricted than they are in a game like Magic, because in a game like Magic, those decks have to figure out ways to survive long enough, to play enough control elements, to sweep the board, whatever the case may be, so that they can get to their end game and do their big crazy plays, and that's not as much of a concern here. That being said, I haven't played with all of the cards yet. The initial set is 400 cards, and I've only played with 3 different pre-constructed decks so far, which have given me a taste of what the game has to offer. But there's a 400 card set here, and there may be many more mechanics, themes, archetypes within this set that help aggro to be more viable that we haven't gotten around to yet. The last thing that I want to talk about as a concern is there is a no reprint policy in this game. Just like Magic the Gathering and many other games, there are special collector's edition of cards, one-of-ones, and stuff like that that you can collect that will probably be worth a lot of money. And the no reprint policy is meant to protect the collector from investing in a card and then eventually having it reprinted and the value dropping considerably. In the long run, this could be awful for a new player 5 years from now just getting into the game that wants to get their hand on a card from the first set and just can't. That being said, I don't think there's a perfect answer to this problem, and I think it's noble that the developers are at least trying to find a solution and exploring other options here. After all, they could just reprint their most powerful, most expensive cards and keep selling them to consumers and making more money off of them. So something like this definitely seems to be a player-first, community-first focus. And honestly, that ideology is cemented even further by the way that they're approaching the launch of this game. But don't take my word for it, you should just head on over to wondersccg.com and check out what they have in store. Their player-first focus is made even more apparent by the 8 print-and-play decks that they have up on their website, and they are urging the community to download these decks and play the game for free because they believe in the game so much. And it doesn't stop there. If you don't have anyone to play with in person, you can even download Tabletop Simulator, and they have a version of the game you can access there that you can also play for free with others. This is probably also a really good time to mention the fact that this game was designed by none other than Brian Tinsman, and for you guys that have played Magic as long as I have, you might remember Brian from designing some of the crazier Magic sets from Magic's history. Sets like Time Spiral, which is one of my favorites. He was usually the guy that they put on the 3rd set of a block when it came time to take that block's mechanics and do all the crazy things, amp them up to 11, and really experiment and go ham. That was what Brian was known for, so if you're wondering if this game has legs, if it can go the distance, and if there's enough depth to the game to keep it going, that should answer that question right away. So, what do I think of the game? I have some reservations. I'm worried about the long term, but right now, I'm kind of loving it, honestly. I want to play more, and I'm wondering if you guys would like to see more content from this game posted on my channel. I'm considering possibly doing some deck techs. I've reached out to the developers about potentially doing that, so if that's something you'd be interested in, definitely let me know in the comments. And like I said, you should probably check this game out because it's free. You can download the decks, print them out, and play them. You can download it on Tabletop Simulator. There's so many ways to play this game, and the developers really want to just spread the word and get the game out there, and they seem less concerned with making money right now and more concerned about growing the community and actually having a game that people can stand behind and believe in. So, go check out the game. Let me know how you feel about it, and if you get some games under your belt, let me know, and maybe play a game with me. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.